Good evening, everyone, comrades and friends. Thank you for coming this evening. Very pleased to see so many people here. And we will be reporting this event for those who are unable to attend to be able to watch it later. So I will just first acknowledge that we are on various different territories of different Indigenous nations across the country. Treaty 6 and 7 in Alberta, others in other parts of the country. And simply to underline that the Communist Party has long had a policy of advocating for equality amongst nations, and that we recognize not only the rights of Indigenous people, as described in the UNDRIP Treaty, but that we work towards a new constitutional regime in Canada where all nations are recognized and where each nation has self-determination, including the right to make the decisions over their own resources within their own territories. So I'll now just like to introduce our party leader, Liz Rowley, who will be reporting to us about the political report that was adopted by our Central Committee, which met last February 10th and 11th. So during these committee meetings, Central Committee meetings, which happen about twice a year, we take a quick look at the whole world situation, the political situation in Canada, the situation with the political fight back by the working class within Canada, and the tasks for the party. So it's a kind of a review of the whole general political situation for a party several times a year. So without more ado, I'll invite Liz Rowley to report on that meeting and the contents of that report. Go ahead, Liz.
Thank you very much, Naomi. Comrades and friends, very nice to be here this evening speaking with you. As Naomi said, I've been asked to report on the Central Committee meeting that took place on the weekend of February 10th and 11th in Toronto. And just to let you know that Comrade Naomi Rankin and Jonathan from Calgary were also present at the meeting. Jonathan Troutman, and both were active contributors at the meeting and can certainly add to the report that I'm going to make, as well as responding to any questions, etc. So just to begin, and I'll try to be concise. I wonder if you have seen this document or had a chance to read it. Has anybody had a chance to read it yet? No, eh? Okay, so this, oh, somebody has. Somebody's got the thumbs up there.
I read that thing on the internet. Was it on the internet, the political report? Because I read it.
Some of it is on the internet, I believe, but the last section on the party and the press and the YCL is not on the internet, because that's you know, it's not for the whole world to see, but it is something we're going to discuss tonight. So you may have seen it on the internet, and if you haven't received it yet, I don't know, Naomi and Jonathan, you should have received it in the email. Are you able to forward, or have you forwarded, or could you?
Forwarded the email with the PDF attached to the club member.
Okay, well, just so you know, comrades, the report has, what is it, 24 and a half pages. So I promise you, I'm not going to read the whole thing to you. You'll be happy to know, but you can read the whole thing and you'll get information that I'm not going to be able to give you in the time that I have. So I strongly recommend that you give it a read. The title of this report is Reaction, Genocide, Environmental Catastrophe, and Growing Resistance, which is the key thing, the growing resistance. But we also obviously are very concerned about the growth of a reaction and environmental catastrophe, the threat of war, and the reality of war and genocide, certainly in the Middle East. And what has really happened since I guess it's probably 8 months since the previous Central Committee meeting, we have seen a real expansion in the drive to war by U.S. imperialism and by NATO, which I guess you could describe in short form as US imperialism's global army. And so we've been at war, and Canada's been at war as well in Ukraine. We've just entered the third year. And since our last meeting, of course, we now see the Israeli genocide in Palestine against the Palestinian people, in particular, the catastrophe that is taking place, the devastation, the genocide that's taking place, particularly in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. And the fact that the United States remains the main and possibly almost the only big imperialist power still supporting Israel's policy of genocide against the Palestinian people. I say almost the only main power, but of course it just continues to be supported by the UK, by Canada, by Australia, etc., by the governments of those countries, although there is massive resistance in those countries, in our own country, and in countries around the world to what is taking place there. And it's pretty obvious that it is a genocide. And as we all know, the criminal court has, no, sorry, the International Court of Justice. Hello?
No, keep going.
The International Court of Justice has said that it certainly looks like genocide and has called on Israel to take the necessary measures to make sure that it is not genocide, which is pretty clearly a declaration that it is in fact genocide, and that Israel must stop its genocidal proceedings, war, murders, death, etc., against the Palestinian people, or be prepared to face charges in the International Criminal Court when this is over. Of course, the main thing is to stop it while there is still a Palestinian people left to talk about what is a political resolution to the problem. And the political resolution, as I think most people know if they're paying much attention, is the resolutions that have been passed long since in the United Nations, which call for the establishment of a Palestinian state based on the 1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as the capital of the Palestinian state, and with the right of return for all of those who were forced into exile as a result of the last war, the 1967 war, and the initial Nakba, which occurred in 1948. So this is the political solution. We're now seeing the U.S. Beginning to respond to the massive pressure around the world, and but they are not talking about the UN solution to the creation of a Palestinian state. They're talking about what they will define as a Palestinian state, and of course, the Israeli government is talking about a Palestinian, what we say, Palestinian territories that will continue to be ruled and occupied by the Israeli military. So that is no solution. And the war will likely continue until this matter is resolved with either the victory of the Israeli government and state supported by US imperialism and other imperialist powers, or the victory of peace and justice and a sovereign state for the Palestinian people. I should like to say here that there shouldn't be any confusion as to our position with respect to the Hamas attack in August, which was what precipitated was the act that opened the door for the Israeli military to launch the current war on the Palestinian people. This was an attack which was reprehensible and unacceptable and insupportable. At the same time, there are all kinds of indications that, in fact, the Israeli military was aware of what was going to happen and deliberately did not act to prevent it, because the Israeli government was looking for a pretext to launch the war that they have subsequently launched, and the genocide that is now taking place. And whether that's the case or not, it certainly was the excuse, if you will, that the Israeli government used to launch the current war. So I'm speaking at maybe for a long time about this war, but it is a very serious war. It's a very serious situation, a very dangerous situation. We know that the Israeli government is very anxious to involve Iran in this war. In part, that's what the attacks in the Red Sea are all about. The Iranian government, of course, is no friend of working people. And if you ask communists in Iran and the Communist Party of Iran, what do they think of the government of Iran, which is a religious government, a reactionary government? They will say that it is up to the people of Iran to deal with that government, to defeat it. But it is also up to the progressive people around the world to make sure that imperialism does not interfere. It does not start a war with Iran, and that leaves the issue of sorting things out inside Iran to the Iranian people, who are also the victims of imperialism and of the current situation. So we could, find ourselves in the possibility of a nuclear war exists in the Middle East. Israel is the country that has nuclear weapons. And Iran has nuclear capacity, and it's a powder keg, very dangerous situation. We've seen some changes develop with the Saudi Arabians governments changing their position of support for Israel, where they've made statements now saying that if Israel will not support for Israel, I'm sorry, they're saying that they will recognize the Israeli government if Israel will recognize a Palestinian state. So this is a new development or pressure on the Israeli government to find to implement the UN resolutions that have been passed many years ago and that still stand as the road marks to peace in the region. The other main area that's new in the development is imperialism and NATO, the AUKUS agreement of Australia, the UK, and the US in the South China Sea and the seas all the way up the coast. The AUKUS agreement allows the establishment of a nuclear powered submarine base in Australia. It is US warships are already in the region, trying to provoke China, also DPRK, or otherwise known as North Korea. So far, Vietnam has not been provoked at this stage of the game. But the situation with Taiwan is very dangerous. As you may know, the geography is that China is the mainland. Taiwan is an island off the mainland, but it is part of China. And the US is patrolling warships through the Taiwan Straits, declaring that they are in international waters. However, there was very recently a very close call between a Canadian warship, which was also patrolling, in quotes, with the US warships in the Straits, and almost rammed a Chinese warship, which was there protecting the sovereignty of China, including Taiwan. So this is another area that is a real powder keg. So this development of, the danger of war is growing by the month. And it really calls out for the peace forces and all those who care about, not seeing the world explode in a nuclear war and be, the end of the world, to mobilize for peace and for disarmament, and against the purveyors of war. And this means, in the first place, imperialism and NATO. And when we come home to look at what is Canada's policy with respect to imperialism and NATO, we see that Canada, who before 1990 was a cheerleader for US imperialism, but was not involved in US imperialist wars, things have changed dramatically. And now Canada is very much a part of the US war machine. We have a massive military industrial complex in Canada, manufacturing and exporting weapons of war, equipment, munitions, etc. And Canadian troops, of course, are, patrolling with US troops around the world. We are also being pressed very hard, and the Parliament and the political parties who are all there have agreed that Canada should work to increase military spending to 2% of GDP, which is what NATO is demanding, and the US government is also demanding. And of course, that money, already we've seen a huge increase in expenditures on NATO since Chrystia Freeland became I would say, the Minister of War in this country. And we will see more, considerably more, more expenditures on NATO, if they in fact do reach the 2% target. At present, we are spending 1.29% of GDP on NATO. So you can see that this would be a pretty massive increase. And where does it come from? Well, pretty obviously, it comes from healthcare, it comes from post-secondary education, it comes from the Canada Pension Plan, it comes from employment insurance. It certainly comes from the absence of social and public housing construction, and it comes from the absence of any substantive action to reduce to net zero carbon pollution in this country, and the effects of mining and the oil and gas industry and so on. So this is a pretty serious situation. We have a government and a main opposition, and even the NDP, who have been cheerleading the Canadian government in these various wars, none of whom in Parliament have stood up and said, this is a disastrous policy that could lead to the end of the world, that will destroy the countries where Canada is involved in making wars, will create a huge mass influx of refugees from the countries that Canada is involved in bombing and destroying, and is the road to disaster in Canada in general. So we think that, there is a substantive movement for peace and against genocide in Israel. And I remember, and I'm sure some of you who are old enough will also remember, that the massive peace movement that brought millions of people into the streets by the the early 1970s and late 1960s was built around opposition to the war in Vietnam. And I think we can say that the massive opposition that is being built around the opposition to Israeli genocide, we need to do what we can to build that movement and broaden it out, so that it is about more than about the imperialism's support for genocide, and it becomes a movement that will fight for an independent Canadian foreign policy of peace, an end to the export of arms and the building of arms and weaponry in Canada, and instead for conversion of those expenditures on the military, instead to be used to fund social programs, to fund the transition from carbon economy to renewable energy, guaranteeing the wages of workers who are caught in the transition and their jobs as well, that will be used to build affordable social housing and public housing, that will be used to create jobs, that will be used for public education and post-secondary education, that would be free to all Canadians as well as international students, that would pay professors and teaching assistants and so on, people who work in these institutions properly, instead of the current poverty wages that are being paid to teaching assistants, for example, who do a majority of the instruction in post-secondary education today. So I'm going to stop there, but I think you get the picture here, what our job is. We're in particular concerned with building the anti-imperialist current within the peace movement in Canada, because that is the current which can build the strongest anti-imperialist war machine force. We want to build up the broad peace movement as well, of course, not only the Canadian Peace Congress and the MQP, which is the equivalent in Quebec, but the broader peace forces. But the best way to do that is to have a strong anti-imperialist core of the peace movement that can explain to people what is the connection between war and the drive to war and the refugee crisis. What's the connection with the privatization of public services and healthcare? What is the connection between very right-wing populist political parties and the drive to war and the drive to impoverish Canadian workers? And that is something that you will only get from the anti-imperialist section of the peace movement. You will see in the document that we not only talk about these big questions, but we also talk about some particular things. For example, on the issue of provocations against North Korea, the DPRK has taken the position recently that they are no longer support the call for their call. They no longer advocate a call for reunification of North and South Korea. And the reason is that they regard South Korea as being hand in glove with US imperialism, Japan, and all of those forces which are trying to overthrow the government in DPRK. And there's plenty of evidence to show that, in fact, that is the case. The visit of US government officials to the South Korea, the arrival of a nuclear weapons, a nuclear submarine equipped with nuclear weapons to the south, flyovers over North Korea, through their air sovereignty, etc., by US, Japanese aircraft. So this also shows you that Japan's foreign policy has also changed from, that they will not rearm for anything except self-defense. Well, this has nothing to do with self-defense for Japan. These are very provocative actions intended to lead to war. The situation in Sudan, a very dangerous situation. You may be aware that there was for a brief time a civilian military government, coalition government that came together around the various reforms that would benefit working people and peasants, small farmers who live in Sudan. That government was overthrown by the military, including sections of the government military. Now there are two forces fighting for control of Sudan's very wealthy, rich resources, natural resources. On one side are the government military, and on the other side are I would say ragtag, but they're pretty well funded, and they represent sections of big capitalists in the European Union, and it's a fight over who is going to control these wealthiest resource area in Africa. So that's what this is really about. And the forces for democracy, including Sudanese Communist Many of them have been jailed. Many of them have been killed. And, you know, for the Canadian government that is always talking about democracy and speaking up for governments that, you know, fight for ordinary people, as the NDP likes to call them, or everyday people, well, they have zip to say about Sudan. And there is now a massive famine in Sudan. People are starving to death. The country is in ruins, and it is just a disaster. We have written to the government and asked them to speak out and to oppose what is happening in Sudan and to call for a political settlement. But, you know, the imperialist powers are just as happy to see this fight continue, because in the end, they hope that they will be the ones that will control the resources, and never mind the people of Sudan. And from their perspective, if they're a politically progressive people there, like Sudanese communists, if they are killed and the party is destroyed, well, so much the better. So this is a pretty serious situation as well. The situation in Venezuela, very sad situation, has developed there, where the government of President Maduro has been under enormous pressure from imperialism, especially U.S. imperialism, for many years at this point. As we all know, there's been great shortages imposed on the civilian population and enormous political pressure. And what has happened is that the government has started to bend, and they've made concessions to imperialism that are very dangerous and not supportable in any way. And the most, and this includes, for example, I think everyone here will know that Venezuela is an oil-rich country. The oil is publicly owned, and there is enormous pressure to privatize that oil. And we all know who will be the beneficiaries of privatization of the state oil company in Venezuela. In addition, and very sadly, the oldest political party in Venezuela is the Communist Party of Venezuela, and it has been effectively dissolved. The PSUV government of Maduro has declared the party membership illegal, and has more or less, well, not more or less, it has seized the party, control of the party, its property, its name, the seats that it holds in the parliament, in the Venezuelan parliament, and declared all of its members not to be members of the Communist Party. It has recognized a ragtag group of former members of the Venezuelan ruling party, the PSUV, to be the members of the Communist Party of Venezuela. Of course, this is all completely illegal, no matter which way you look at it. And there is now a team of international lawyers who are part of the Communist Party's, the legitimate Communist Party's challenge to the government for these actions. And the Communist Party continues to operate in Venezuela, continues to have broad support amongst the working people of Venezuela, who are pretty horrified by what the PSUV government is doing, not only to the Communist Party, but to the country. And not only is the Communist Party under attack, but also leaders of trade unions, which have challenged the government over its collective bargaining, but also its political policies. Some of these people have been killed. Likewise, leaders of the peasant movement, the small farmers movement, some of these people have also been assassinated. So it's a very sad situation, because we all know what the origins of the Maduro government were. This is the part of the liberation of Venezuela that progressive people around the world were so excited to see and so supportive of until the recent period. So this causes complications in terms of solidarity with Venezuela. We continue to support the solidarity movements and to be part of them. This is important. But we also condemn the concessions that the Maduro government has made, and in particular, the attacks on the labor and peasants movements and on the Communist Party of Venezuela. These are not the actions of progressive government. And this is the sad situation. It reflects the strength and the power of imperialism to pressure countries around the world. Likewise, Cuba. Cuba is under similar pressure, maybe more pressure. But the difference is that the government of Cuba is resisting. The people of Cuba continue to resist more than 60 years after the blockade has been imposed on them, despite enormous shortages of food, of energy, of materials that they need, for example, for medical supplies that they need, but also medical supplies that they need in order to develop new drugs, which they are, as we all know, exporting around the world, so that it is not only for their own people, but for people all over Latin America, Asia, Africa, etc. And so the pressure is on to build up the solidarity movements and to put more pressure as much as possible on the US government and on the Canadian government not to bend to US pressure, and on the US to take Cuba off its list of state sponsors of terrorism. Of course, we all know that the biggest state sponsor of terrorism in the world is the US. However, because of the Helms-Burton Act, countries that trade with Cuba will not be able to trade with the U.S. And for many small countries, this is they can't accept that kind of an arrangement. They can't survive without trade with the U.S. And so this is where the BRICS comes in, the BRICS countries, which Cuba is now applying to join the BRICS group. Offers the opportunity to do trade without using US dollars. And that may be one way to help Cuba. It's not the solution to the problem of US imperialism and the pressure that it is exerting on Cuba and other countries in the region, but it does provide maybe a breath of relief while the fight against US imperialism and its anti-Cuba, anti-Sudan, anti-Palestine, anti-people policies and pro-war policies continue to dominate. Having said that, it's pretty clear, comrades, that things are very, very dangerous at the international level, and that we have to conclude from this that the importance of building up the peace movement is in our communities, and we as a Communist Party and as communists and progressive people, really, we are on the spot here to build up the peace forces and help people to understand that for example, in Canada, the enormous expenditures on war, on NATO, on military spending are unacceptable and are contributing to the possibility of a global nuclear war. That's the reality. And they are also coming out of important social programs, job creation, environmental protections that Canadians need and that are essential for us to survive as well. What else can I say? The US elections. Well, everyone is pretty worried about the outcome of the US elections, and it's not looking good. And I'm sure you all read the papers, same as we do, and you know that there is now a serious possibility that Trump will be in the Republican candidate on the ballots this fall when the US election takes place, and it'll be a Trump versus Biden campaign by the looks of it. And the outcome is certainly unclear. If that's what's on the ballot, it's not clear at all that Biden is going to beat Trump. It could be the other way. So how do we see that? Well, in the first place, it's not a certainty. One of the possibilities here is that with all of the charges that Trump is facing, that may prevent him from becoming a candidate. And that would be a good thing, because while on many things, including foreign policy, the Democrats and Republicans are not very far apart, it is a fact Trump has the support of the military, the police, and sections of big business in the US. which he didn't have previously. He had the support of the oil and gas industry and other resources, and he still has that. But he didn't have much support from Wall Street. Most of that went to Hillary Clinton in 2016. But now he has some support. And why is that? What's new? Because he's promising more tax cuts to big business and more legislation that would benefit big business. And so he has got support, not only from the working people who have been drawn into his populist net of reaction, and including fascist forces, but he also has the support of important sections of business. So that means money, amongst other things. So very dangerous developments. And will foreign policy change if we get Trump instead of Biden? I don't know that it will change that much, because I don't know how much worse things could get internationally than with Biden. On the other hand, it could be that, that this guy would be quite happy to launch a war with Russia, which is what the war with Ukraine is all about, but it's the proxy war at this point. There isn't an open war. And if there is a settlement around the Ukrainian war, then the question is, when is the face-off going to come between NATO and Russia, and what form will it take? Well, we don't want any kind of military face-off. We want political solutions to what are political problems. And is that more likely with Biden and Trump? I don't know, comrades. It's hard to tell. But we do know that the forces behind Trump are more dangerous to working people than the forces that are lining up behind Biden at the moment. That doesn't mean it's a good situation either way. Don't misunderstand me. It's a very dangerous situation either way. But the greater danger, in our view, at this moment, is Trump. So, and this shows the difficulty in U.S. politics, that the choices between for the American people are between two, imperialist political parties that are prepared to destroy the world, either through their environmental policies or their foreign policies or their economic policies, including their own people. So there's more here on the international situation. I'm not going to go any further. I said quite a bit about it, but it is pretty important and took up a lot of the time that we were of the Central Committee when we were discussing it, because everything that happens internationally has a direct impact on what happens in Canada and other countries too, but also Canada. We've seen our own foreign policy move substantially to the right. Increasingly, every year it gets worse. And Chrystia Freeland is certainly the Minister of War, and may indeed be the next Liberal leader and possibly the next Prime Minister in Canada. So let's talk a bit about Canada here. The polls show that if an election were held today, Pulliver and the Tories would form the next government with a huge majority. They're already 15 points ahead in the polls from the Liberals, and that's substantial. And the NDP is kind of holding its own, which means that the NDP is not making much of a mark with the Canadian public. And what's the reason? Well, because they don't say anything. They don't stand up and say they disagree with Canadian foreign policy, and they're going to vote against, and they're going to bring the government down, and so on. The things that would mark them as being different from the Liberals and Tories, the big business parties. And in fact, the reason they won't do it is because they aspire to become a big business party. That is the NDP's goal. When they got rid of socialism in their program and constitution, these are the kinds of policies that they've adopted. It's the explanation for why the Alberta government under the NDP did the things that they did. And I think, as Naomi and some others have said, the NDP government was in the pocket of the oil and gas companies, the same as Daniel Smith is. So it's not, they're not substantially different in terms of who they speak for. They speak for the oil and gas and resource sector. So why would working people in Alberta or anywhere else in the country be interested in supporting the NDP when those are the policies that it in general supports and advocates. Of course, the NDP has done some good things while it has been in a partnership supporting the Liberal government. We see that there are some moves towards pharmacare, but these are pretty small moves when they're talking about diabetes drugs and what is it? Drugs for women and reproductive health. These are important, but they're a long way away from pharmacare. Pharmacare means all drugs, and this is not what we're looking at. The NDP leader Jagmeet Singh at the CLC convention last spring announced to delegates that they had made a breakthrough and they have brought dental care under the umbrella of Medicare. And that too was wishful thinking, as one of the delegates to the convention stood up and said right after he'd spoken. This woman, who was a public sector worker, said, "We appreciate that there's some dental care for kids. Not much, mind you. You can get a couple of cavities filled, but you won't get any braces or anything that's anything big. The maximum is $600 a year, and that next year, so that's this year, that people over 70 will have some coverage, but the next government could reverse it all. It's not part of Medicare. It needs to be part of Medicare. So the NDP could have made a lot more gains if they had been willing to press, but they're not willing to press too hard because they aspire to replace the Liberals as a governing party in Canada. And that means they are pitching to business. And so they're not prepared to piss off the big business in this country. And that's why we are seeing a parliament which is very quiet. The same with the Green Party. And of course, the Bloc is not very far from, in fact, the Bloc was created as a split off from the Conservative Party federally on the basis of the national question, that it's representative of some conservative forces in Quebec. So for working people to look at the current parliament and say, what are you going to do for us? The answer is not much. And that is why, when you add in the economic crisis caused by the Bank of Canada and big business in this country, profits that are more than double any profits that have been made anywhere in the country in any previous year, in 2023 were twice as high as the highest ever recorded. Add to that the increases, 10 increases in the interest rates by the Bank of Canada in 2022 that has raised the cost of borrowing, the cost of housing, the cost of mortgages, the cost of food, the cost of oil and gas to get from A to B, and people can't make it. And we have seen banks setting aside huge amounts of money, not once, but twice now, because they are expecting mortgage defaults. And in fact, the Toronto Star in yesterday's paper said mortgage delinquencies up by 50% over last year. And this is going to get worse because there are over 2 million mortgages that are coming up for renewal in the next 2 years. And a lot of those people aren't going to be able to afford the increases. The average increase for a mortgage holder who's renewed their mortgage this year, like my daughter, for example, is an increase of $457 a month. And this is just the average. So you can imagine that people who own property in places like Vancouver, Toronto, Calgary are going to be paying even more than that when they renew their mortgages. So we've heard now that inflation has fallen this month, but interest rates haven't fallen. And it may be that they will come down a little bit in the future, but they're not down now. And for all of the struggles that took place by labor last year in terms of trying to get better collective agreement, lots of strikes, some lockouts, and some gains in collective agreements, still overall, workers have not caught up with the real wages that they lost as a result of years of wages falling behind and the inflation in the cost of food, fuel, housing, etc. over the last, well, since the beginning of COVID. So workers are still behind in their real wages. Even though they've seen some increases in their pay, they're still behind. And so wages are declining, and so is the living standards. And we are going to be seeing a lot of mortgage defaults and people forced to walk. And we are also seeing, and we will see more of people being evicted for the same reasons. And we are seeing cities that are in trouble. We're seeing massive privatization of healthcare underway, mostly carried out by provincial governments, while the federal government underfunds healthcare and has done for years and continues to do it now, and refuses to implement the Medicare Act, which prevents privatization that is taking place. It's all illegal. But of course, you have to have a government that's willing to say, no, you can't do that. It's illegal, and we forbid you, and we'll take you to court, and we'll run you out of town, and all that. And so we are seeing catastrophic declines in living standards, and people are very, very upset, very angry, and rightfully so. But when you see the NDP kissing up to big business, you see that the Tories and the Liberals doing everything they can to support big business. Look at how they vote in Parliament. Look who speaks and what do they say in Parliament. You can see why people don't have any confidence in politicians. They think all politicians are like that. They don't have any confidence in government institutions. They look at the Bank of Canada and say, thanks for nothing. Thanks for stealing my house. Thanks for taking my kids' education away. Thanks for stealing my job. And so along come the Tories. And they don't anymore say, well, we represent the super wealthy in this country. And who are you, you dirty workers? Which is what they used to say. You know, they were the party of the elites. Now they say, and now I'm quoting not Pulever, but the guy before him, whose name is just escaped me, but you know, the former leader of the Conservative Party, who said on Labor Day last year, he said, the Conservatives, we are the party of workers, not unions, workers. And so, and they will say some populist things, you know, it's rough. They will say, it's terrible what is happening to working people in this country. And what's the cause of it? The Liberals are the cause of it. And their socialist friends in the NDP. And, you know, people who don't know any better can fall for that stuff. And how big can the fall be? Well, you know, a recent poll taken amongst trade unionists, to ask trade unionists, how are you going to vote if an election was taken today? If an election was held today, 25% of them said they were going to vote Tory. So that should scare the pants off everybody. And it shows you that there's a lot of workers who don't know what workers' interests are as compared to big business interests. They know they're getting screwed. So why would you vote for a party that's doing the screwing? Because that's what big business is. These are their policies. This is their government. This is what they want. This is what they're getting. And so the answer is workers who are not well informed politically are open to this kind of populism, that anybody who says, I feel for you, I understand your pain, trust me. Well, people who say that sort of thing, you should never trust them, never. But people are desperate. They're looking for answers and they're not finding them. And significant numbers of people have shifted to the right. And this is a matter of serious concern in Canada because these right-wing forces around the Tories also include fascist groups and also include the religious right, people who are now parties with and groupings that are now busy attacking public libraries and the LGBTIQ community, trans kids and so forth. These are the forces that are also very racist and anti-women and anti-immigrant and anti-worker all coming together. So this is a very dangerous mix. So what are we going to do here? Well, this comes to the fight back. It's very important, the strike movement last year, because for more than 30 years, workers more or less put their heads down and just took it. And a lot of workers thought, well, we'll just bull through. We'll just get through this and life will be better next year. And next year it would be like, well, maybe it's next year that, like, So after 30 years, workers finally said, no, not going to get better. We're going to have to fight. And we saw some very big strikes. The biggest ones of all were the Common Front strikes in Quebec, which took place in November, December, and over the Christmas holidays. They negotiated a deal, which improved wages somewhat, scared the pants out of the CAQ government, which is another very right-wing government in Canada, very much like the Alberta government. But these agreements, one of the things that they tried to do in Quebec with the Common Front was to raise wages at the bottom levels, which had really fallen behind. And, professional workers had wages that were livable, not great, still behind inflation, but workers at the bottom, the people who push the trolleys with in the hospitals with sick people in them. Those are the people who clean the hospitals and things like that, and the universities and so on. These are the people with very low wages. So it was quite impressive that the trade union movement came together with the determination that this was going to be their focus, was to raise wages across the board, but really focused on the people at the bottom. Well, they made some gains. And what was really important, you should know this, most people don't. Most of those unions didn't have a strike fund. So workers were out on strike, no strike pay. And they were out on unlimited general strikes. Now, this was tough. This was really tough. So you can tell these are determined people. And as I said, they made important gains. They didn't get everything they wanted. So when they finally got these tentative agreements, some of them they barely passed. One of the teachers' union voted to accept the tentative agreement. It passed by 14 votes. That's how close it was. Well, it's a good thing it wasn't 14 votes against, because it wouldn't be good to go back out on strike with half of your membership wanting to go back. But it's a good thing to go back with half of your membership not happy with the agreement, because the employer knows they better not screw around with the workers with that kind of anger amongst the workers going back to work. Well, we also had big strikes in English-speaking Canada. We had the St. Lawrence Seaway strike. We had the PSAC strike, first strike they'd had for many years. We had the Windsor Salt strike in Windsor, Ontario, where the workers were out for 5 months. Windsor Salt is a multinational corporation, and they said to the workers in Windsor, go ahead, walk your heads off, because we can get salt anywhere in the world. Not dependent on you. And to their credit, they stuck together and they continued to fight. And when they were offered a tentative agreement partway through, it was a crap agreement, and they turned it down and they stayed out on strike. And they finally got an agreement. Now that takes that's some real solidarity, some real unity. And of course, Windsor's a union town. They had a lot of support from the local population. So did the workers in Quebec, by the way. The public supported the workers. They didn't support the government. And the outcome of the Quebec strike, I should have mentioned, was that if an election were held today, the government of Quebec would be thrown out on its ear. And because of the position that they took against the workers in those strikes at the end of last year. Well, some of the strikes were very long. They were very tough. The important thing about them was the unity that they showed and the willingness of workers to fight. And we are going to see this movement continue through this year. There will be more strikes. There'll be more lockouts and more struggles. So our job, in part, is to do everything we can to support this movement, to help people to understand why they have to strike, just to get a decent income so they can pay the rent and feed, get the groceries and feed their kids. So they can understand what's behind it. What we're dealing with here is multinational corporations supported by governments which represent their interests are disciplining workers here. They're saying that profits are primary, and that workers have to bend a knee. And if they don't, they're going to face very tough anti-union legislation, long strikes, and the government is going to be supporting the big corporations that they're fighting, and right-wing governments. A lot of these workers were public sector workers. And you probably all heard about the strike in Ontario, where the CUPE workers in the schools were about to go out on strike, and the Ford government said it was going to implement the notwithstanding clause in the Constitution to block their strike. And immediately the CLC and unions across the country said, you pull that, and we are going to organize a general strike right across the country. Absolute tight unity, nobody flinched. And the government backed off. The workers got their collective agreement, and they got a decent deal. But that's the kind of message that is coming out now, that workers have got to stick together and they've got to fight. If they don't fight, they're going to get screwed. And this is the harsh reality of capitalism in 2024. We are trying to do what we can to, as I said, to help workers to understand what it is they're fighting, what are the political forces involved in this struggle, the importance of unity, and the importance of fighting for some political demands as well as the economic ones. And you will see in the section on the fight back here and on the political alternatives, we are saying that the government must roll back prices and profits and curb corporate power in Canada. They need to build affordable social housing now right across the country and in large numbers. They need to guarantee that no one will pay more than 20% of their incomes on housing, on rent. And this means real rent control legislation should be legislated from coast to coast. We are demanding that action be taken now to emergency action and a plan to eliminate, to bring net zero carbon emissions, to stop the catastrophic environmental destruction, and there's plenty of it in this country because we're a resource-based country, and to act now to convert military spending to social spending, to fund Medicare, education, social programs, the Canada Pension Plan, employment insurance, and so on. And to create jobs, real jobs, industrial jobs, jobs in the public sector, so that people have some security in their incomes and in their employment. And that the government must also take action to ensure that the Bank of Canada rolls back interest rates, which are one of the methods that the government uses to discipline workers and to drive down wages and living standards in the country. So this is pretty important. And this idea that the Bank of Canada is somehow independent of Parliament or government is just rubbish. It's propaganda. It says the government can say, we have nothing to do with it. There's nothing we can do about it. Absolute rubbish. And these strikes and protests and so on will show that. And we're up against also the ultra left. And not only are we up against the populism, right-wing populism of Paul Evra and the Tories, which is the main threat, but there's also the ultra-left who will go to conventions like the CLC or the Alberta Fed or the labor councils or trade union local meetings and say, general strike, that's the way forward. Well, sure, we're for a general strike too, but it doesn't come because somebody makes a fiery speech in a convention or because they make a demand that a motion be passed. These are things that have to be built. We've had 2 general strikes in this country, and the last one was in 1976. And the party and the left played a huge role in pressing the CLC and the unions across the country to participate. And it took a long time to organize it and to build it and to make it happen. And that's what needs to take place now. We support a general strike, but it's got to be a real general strike, not just, you know, glad handing and raising a fist in a convention or a meeting. That's just rubbish. And workers know that, and they think it's just flim flam. And so we have to lay out how we do this. How is it possible to do this? And it has to be built from the bottom up, and pressure needs to be exerted. I should tell you that we're in the process now of rewriting and updating our labor policy. We will be putting out a leaflet for Labor Day about what we see as how to get a fighting trade union movement, a united trade union movement in Canada. We think this will be an important document, will help to unite the left and point a way forward for how we can build a left and build the forces for, you know, a militant fighting trade union movement in Canada. We are also going to be putting out a leaflet, another mass campaign this spring, starting in April through June. We'll be publishing 80,000 pieces of material. And the main focus will be, again, curbing corporate prices and rolling back corporate prices on consumer goods, on housing, on oil and gas, and so forth, fuel. But we will also be linking it tightly to the whole question of conversion, military spending into spending on people's needs, not corporate greed. So that'll be the twist in the thing, if you will, and also for environmental protection. And we think people don't understand, in the main, the danger of military spending. It's two-sided. On the one hand, it's the danger of blowing up the world, but on the other hand, it's the destruction of the important things for working people in our own country, our social programs, affordable social housing, decent wages, good jobs, so, you know, public education that's open to all, national child care program, and so forth. So if we can get people to begin to understand what the links are here, what are the conditions, what are the connections, that will be the objective of this campaign this spring, and also to build, therefore, the movement for social change, but also the movement for peace, for disarmament, and for a policy of demilitarization and peace and conversion. Well, finally, comrades, I can tell you that our discussion about the party then was about the fact that we're pretty small and we need to get bigger. Because the smaller you are, the less influence you have. The bigger you are, the more influence you have. That's pretty obvious to everybody, I think. We can see that we have made some gains. Our party is growing. People are increasingly looking at socialism as an alternative. They're questioning whether capitalism is doing anything for them. And it's about bloody time, I can say. Not everybody, of course, but increasing numbers, especially people on the left, are saying it's not working. And we need to start re-looking at socialism and challenging the anti-communist stuff that is increasingly, you know, a part of daily life in Canada, whether it's that we're fighting in Ukraine because we're fighting the communists in Russia. Of course, Russia is not a communist country. It was overthrown, in fact. Socialism was overthrown by the people currently in power in Russia. So they're no friends of working people. Or whether it's, again, this monument to the victims of communism, or whatever it is. I mean, it's just endless. And it revolves, it's closely tied to the question of the drive to war. So part of talking to people about war is also talking to people about the realities of war. And we know that our enemies are also busy trying to rewrite history, literally in the history books that our kids are studying in schools. They are going to be inserting new sections that deal specifically with, as the Minister of Education in Ontario says, with anti-communism. This is a good thing. This is a heroic thing. And it's no wonder that a lot of young people in this country now think that who were Canadians fighting in World War II? Was it the Russians that were the main enemy here? You know, so that history is being rewritten in a way that is very dangerous to working people. And it's connected with the attack on libraries and the attack on books, you know, but they don't want people to read things that maybe make them challenge the system or think about other ways of living or other systems that might be better than the capitalist system. So we're going to be doing everything we can to, you know, increase the materials that we are able to put out, the campaign materials, but also we want to increase the subscriptions to, for example, Spark, our theoretical paper. We can, and also to People's Voice, because this is where we can talk about these things. Mass distribution of these things is important to the extent that we're able to do it, because we get, and our focus should be on a left-wing and progressive people, working people, students, women, etc., because we can talk to them and challenge some of these ideas and expose people to the ideas of fundamental social change and of socialism. So we are gaining ground, but we're also in a very dangerous situation. I can't underestimate that, or I can't overestimate that. The situation is dangerous, internationally extremely dangerous, and becoming more and more worrisome in our own country, and certainly to the south of us, the US elections and US imperialism. But people are not sitting back and just taking it. Canadian workers are fighting, and our job in part is to make them see not only the economic struggle, but the political struggle and the social struggle that accompanies this. So thank you very much, comrades. I've spoken for a long time, and I'm going to stop now and hand this over to you. I think you get the picture of how much was under discussion at the Central Committee. It was a pretty important Central Committee meeting. And there was so much on the table, because politics is becoming very hot and very dangerous at this point, but also it has opportunities. Opportunities are opening up for us to be able to speak to people about another way to live, another way to work, another kind of society that's not based on war and exploitation. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Liz. I'm now going to open it up for discussion and questions. So if people wish to raise their hand, or if you have trouble raising your hand, maybe even just kind of speak up, or put your name in the chat. You see, I have to open up my chat window as well. So, you know that.
I was wondering, is there about what Liz was saying about rewriting the textbooks? There's a lot of this. I heard they're trying to encourage this whole lot of more that supposedly 6 million people died in the 1932 to 1933 famine. What can we do to combat that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the role of the AUC is pretty important here. This is the famine was supposed to have taken place in the Soviet Union, including in Ukraine, and nobody disputes that there was a famine, all right. But was it a famine that was deliberately created in order to put political pressure on people? Was it something that the Soviet government, the Soviet Communist Party, deliberately did? That's a lie. And that, you know, famines were common at that time through the early 30s. There was disaster for farmers in North America too. For those of you who know Canadian history or US history, this of course was the Steinbeck novels about, you know, what happened to farm labor in on the West Coast in the US. Well, there were similar famines and similar farm catastrophes in Europe as well, including in Ukraine and other parts of the Soviet Union at the time, or Russia at the time. So I think there have been some challenges, some authoritative challenges from historians who are honest what is currently in the, what is it, the Museum of Human Rights, located in Winnipeg is it's just lies. You know, it's not the only thing they lie about, by the way, but this is a big one, as you said. And so it is, it fits in with all the other stuff that is an attempt to erase the progressive history of the first socialist state. This is not to say, by the way, that there weren't mistakes made by the socialist government, the Soviet government in Russia at the time. Sure, there were, and there were probably crimes committed as well. But this notion that there was a deliberate effort to starve people to death by the socialist government, the communist government of Russia, is a lie. It is a lie, and most honest historians know that. The problem is that when you get right-wing governments who say they're going to change the curricula of schools, like they're doing in Ontario now, and probably I think they're also doing this in Alberta and other places on the prairies. This needs to be challenged by us, but also by others who care about truth.
I want to get like a super good.
Yeah,
All right.
Peter? Was that Peter?
So I got my TV back.
Yeah, Peter, did you have a question? Oh, it's silent. Sorry. Okay. All right, I guess the floor is
That tends to happen with you.
Does it-
Yeah.
Muted.
I can't hear anything that you said, Peter.
Okay.
Whenever I don't hear it, if they're there. Whenever I do,
Are you
Yeah.
talking to someone else, Peter, or are you?
If you're talking to us, type in the chat. That might help. That might be the easiest way to ask a question.
All right, I'm just looking now for.
I think his audio has just come on and he's
Yeah.
at work and talking to people at work. I don't know if there's a manual way to
Yeah,
mute him from the.
We have.
The
Okay.
chat. Yeah, I see there are 5 people speaking in the chat, and I noticed that Alex had his hand up.
Okay, so Ben.
Oh.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, is Venezuela still giving aid to Cuba? Do you know anything about that?
I don't know if they currently are. They were recently. The biggest supporters for Cuba at this point from the of the Caribbean countries is actually Mexico. And they also received a lot of aid from China. I'm not sure. I think they're getting some oil from Venezuela, but I think it's a trade deal. Most of them are trade deals, but I think some of them are more favorable trade deal than others. And I don't know exactly what the situation is with Venezuelan oil.
Okay.
Okay. Any further questions or comments? Check chat. Maybe?
Yes, I had one question.
Okay.
Sure, Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, it was just about, is it the Peace Congress that is our main, like, favored peace organization right now still?
Well, the Peace Congress is the one organization in Canada that has an anti-imperialist line, I guess you could say, that recognizes the role of imperialism in terms of provoking wars and militarism and promoting in particular the interests of US imperialism, not only, but that's the main one. So yes, for that reason, we think that the Peace Congress is a pretty valuable organization. Not only that, but the Peace Congress is not an organization that comes and goes. Many peace organizations are, very active and busy, are formed and then disappear when a particular war ends. And the Peace Congress continues. It's got a policy that is bigger than just a particular war. It has to do with the its critique is of imperialist war in general. And it's the policies that it offers match that. So they address, for example, the issue of support for NATO. And they say support for NATO means support for wars of aggression around the world, and that's why we shouldn't support NATO. And also that, you know, the demands of NATO will also drain funding for social programs in Canada and around the world, and not only here, in all countries. You know, so we think it has a particularly important role in what it does and what it advocates and in its analysis. That doesn't mean it's the only one that we support, by the way, but it's the strongest one, let's say.
Thanks.
Okay, so Peter, you're next.
All right, hi. Just had a question about the situation in Palestine right now. Well, a Palestinian state would be very beneficial and very good for a step forward. It still leaves an Israeli state in place, and Israel, like by their nature, is colonial fascist project. Supporting them maintaining a state.
So you're, if I understand you correctly, you're asking me about a one state versus a two-state solution. Am I right? Is that the question?
Yeah, I've heard Palestinians say they would rather a one state where everybody is equal and there's no ethno state, or there's no racial boundaries to guarantee you citizenship.
Well, our view is that Israel is imperialism's local gendarme. It is there and represents the interests of you know, the biggest imperialist powers in the world, and US imperialism in the first place. And that's why the US consistently supports Israel no matter what the hell they're doing. Of course, there was only one, I don't know we can call it a state, but there was one people in Palestine from, and it was the Palestinian people. And that changed in 1948 when the concentration camps in Europe opened up, and the people who came out of those camps wanted to get the hell out of Europe, and where are they going to go? And it was Palestine where they settled, and the initial settlements there, well, the first country to recognize the Israeli people, who at that time, as I say, were the people who survived the concentration camps. That's who the forebears of the current Israeli people came from. And the first country in the world to recognize them was the Soviet Union. And the reason was because they were the survivors of the fascist concentration camps. And when Israel was first forming, the kibbutz were an important form of organization. It was a collective organization, and they had a socialist character to them. And there was a lot of hope around the world that this was the beginnings of a socialist society in the Middle East. However, the Zionist ideology and ideologues prevailed, if you will, and their objectives of evicting the Palestinian people from their land and of taking over all of Palestine were the government's became the government's main aims. What is a religious state? Israel is a religious state as well as a political state, and this is the source of the problem. And then you add to that support for this aggressive Zionist state from US imperialism, and you've got a big problem if you are the Palestinian people. So what is the solution here? I think our view is that today, those who call for one state, the reality of one state means Israel. The reality is that we will have an Israeli state and the Palestinian people will either be killed or be evicted. And literally that will be the result. A two-state solution it means the formation, as called for by the UN resolutions, of a Palestinian state for the Palestinian people, and that what the state would look like, how big it would be, where it would be located, is also set out in the UN resolutions. That it has to be based on the 1967 borders, so it can't be just some little enclave, a smaller slice of Gaza or a small piece of, it has to be a state that is independent and that is sizable. And it has to have the right of return for people who had to flee as a result of previous wars by Israel. And it has to have a capital in East Jerusalem. Those are the conditions for the formation of a Palestinian state as set out by the United Nations. And this is a solution that, at the end of the day, it will be, let us put it this way, at the end of the day, it will be up to the Palestinian people to decide what they want. And they're not alone, and the Israeli Communist Party supports a Palestinian state and the rights of the Palestinian people, and has been fighting against the Netanyahu government and all previous right-wing Zionist governments as well. And they are also behind some of the big protests that are taking place inside Israel now. And while they are a small party, they are, they are not Zionists, they're communists, and they support the national liberation struggle, and that's essentially what we're looking at, of the Palestinian people. So we think the reality is that those who are talking about a one state solution, what it really comes down to is, will Palestine survive? Will there be a Palestinian state for the Palestinian people, or will they be dispersed or killed? And that is why we say we support the formation of a Palestinian state as defined, with its borders defined and so on, by the United Nations resolutions. We are absolutely opposed to the Netanyahu government's war on the Palestinian people, the genocide, and the actions of this government over decades. When they talk about, for example, I'm sure you all know this, but when they talk about the release of hostages, well, most people understand that to mean the hostages that Hamas took. But Israeli prisons are filled with thousands of Palestinians, many of them very young people, including women and kids, who had who fought against the Zionist attacks on them over the years. This has been a low-level war over decades. So this is not something that is just started, or we hope this will be the end. But the way things are shaping up is extremely dangerous, and we know people are starving to death. And there 30,000 people have been killed, over 70,000 have been injured or are buried under the rubble, and now they're starving to death. That's genocide. And so the question of the survival of the Palestinian people is at issue, and the safest way for them to survive is within their own state, and that this means Israel does not occupy it, has no say over it, and that it is protected by international law. Does that answer your question? I know this is a tricky one. A lot of people are talking about this.
All right, we're going to ask Dane next. It's been waiting for a while. Dane, go ahead.
Thanks. Yep. Can you hear me fine?
Yep.
Is everyone able to hear me okay? All right. Thanks for the excellent talk, Liz. I just had a question around how we're organizing around housing. I know we often say that union struggles can be kind of a proving ground for class struggle, and I feel like for a lot of people, especially younger people, kind of tenant struggles and renter struggles can have kind of a similar role. I know in Calgary we don't have a tenants union. There's some Acorn affiliated group, but yeah, I was just wondering,
Thanks, Mom.
yeah, if we have any. Sorry.
Yep, go ahead. I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah.
Corinne, could you mute your mic?
Yeah.
Palestinian movie, Mom.
I think Corinne, if you could mute yourself. Go ahead, Dane.
Yeah.
That was essentially my question. Just any thoughts on how we're organizing around housing and tenants' rights? I feel like it's a way that a lot of people kind of engage with class struggle the first time as something that, affects them materially on a daily basis. So thanks.
Yeah, good question. So let me start by telling you that the organizing tenants was something that the Communist Party was very active in during the 1960s and 70s and, up to the present. A lot of the buildings in Toronto that have tenants organizations in them were organized by members of the Communist Party. We also are responsible for creating the Metro Tenants organization, which also had lawyers on staff to represent tenants and tenants organization in various struggles. So we got a pretty good history here. I would say we can be proud of that. And the question is to build on it, because for sure, housing is maybe after food, shelter is the next issue, the biggest issue in the country, I would say, in terms of people's living standards and so forth. So some comrades have taken this to mean that they should go out and form a tenants organization. And I don't think this is quite what we're looking at. If you live in a building that doesn't have a tenants union in it, yeah, go ahead, organize your building. If you are part of a tenants organization that has a citywide character, or a part of a city where various unions and buildings already exist, by all means get involved and go ahead. Some comrades will have the idea that this means they should just go out and pick a building and organize it. But it is not, that's not what we're after. What we want is to get tenants to organize themselves, to help them do it, and to do it not directly in the name of the Communist Party, but in the name of, a tenants organization in the city. So Metro Tenants in Toronto, for example, and it's got to be connected with that organization. It can't be just sort of a one-off. Mainly because it doesn't work. If people say, who are you and why are you interested in what we have to pay here, etc. So it's got to be organized. One of the things that is pulling people together is the fact that there's virtually no tenants protection in terms of rents. And that's why we've called for, there used to be rent controls in many provinces across the country. So landlords and right-wing governments have, erased that. And now almost everywhere. And, so rents can be raised, the sky's the limit. And the landlords can always think of excuses of why they have to raise it. And the real answer is they do it because they can, because nobody's stopping them. And so there needs to be pressure on governments to bring in legislation like rent controls, so that landlords cannot just arbitrarily raise rents. They have to meet, there has to be a good reason to raise rents, and they have to be able to show that, not just say it, but they have to show. We also say that we want governments to recognize that it is broadly understood that nobody should be paying more than 20% of their income for shelter, and that the government should enforce that in legislation. And this is, we've found, is a very popular demand. A lot of tenants say, yeah, that's good, I like that one. And also things like, for example, evictions, that you can't just evict people because you want to raise the rent. All these things are covered by tenant protection laws, which mostly did exist in the 1960s and 70s, but have been eliminated across the country. So we want that legislation back, and we want it enforced. In terms of tenant organizing, it also has to do with people who have been evicted. So we're seeing a lot of people who are living in tents on the street through the winter. This includes refugees and so on, particularly in places like BC and Ontario, Quebec, where a lot of immigrants and refugees land when they get off the plane or however they arrive in the country. And for, Canadian winters, although this one's been pretty warm, I have to say. I don't know about Alberta, but here in Ontario, it's been like spring, except for a couple of days this winter. So this is climate change. It's very dangerous, pleasant, but dangerous. But also we've had some incidents where people have died, sleeping outdoors because the shelters were full. It's the same thing with food banks. The churches and food banks are all saying they're overwhelmed with demand. They don't have enough food to feed people. And the shelters are saying they don't have enough beds to house people. So these issues are becoming increasingly hot and important. And this fits with our demands too. The question of converting military to civilian spending does have to do directly with building affordable social housing. And the word affordable has become a bit of a joke. What's affordable? Well, we say what's affordable is 20% of your income. That's what's affordable. And that the government has to get back into the housing business. And the Canadian governments, which are the only ones we've ever had, are Liberal and Tories, but both of them have walked away from any responsibility for building housing. They've left it entirely to the private sector. And these are big, the builders and developers are huge capitalist conglomerates, and they're out to make every nickel they can. A nickel is an understatement. They're out to make every, $1,000 they can. And we've all seen the figures in the newspaper. And by the way, in our report, there are figures in there to, you'll go dizzy reading them all. And the reason they're here is they give you ammunition. That's the purpose of putting them in the report. They give you ammunition so that when you go into the tenants movement, you can say, look here, this is the situation in Canada. And this is, and this is why it's wrong. And this gives us ammunition to make our demands. So I don't know if you live, Dane, in a place, in an apartment that has a tenants union. If you don't, you can start seeing, who else in the building might be interested in getting a tenants organization to make sure that landlords, repair the place, that they don't get away with huge rent increases, that those are challenged. That you link up your tenants organizations with other tenants organizations in the city so that you can come together to make demands on the city, at City Hall or on the province, etc. That you can look at rent strikes. We had rent strikes in Toronto that were effective and that made gains. The people withheld their rents. They put their rents into a bank account that the tenants organizations held, so that when the strike was over, they could, people wouldn't be evicted because they didn't pay their rent. but they withheld their rents, let's put it that way, for a while. And that put pressure on the developers and landlords and so forth. So I think that this is a good way to, you know, to get involved. If you're a tenant, there's lots of ways to get involved here. I mentioned some. There's also the sort of the bigger issues of housing per se for people who are homeless or who are evicted. There should be we say there should be no evictions, for example, due to unemployment, or strikes or lockouts. And that the landlord has to have a good reason to evict. It can't be in the middle of winter, stuff like that. They can't turn off the electricity. Let me just conclude by saying we're going to be organizing a municipal conference in early in the fall next year. And the reason is because this is an important issue, and this will be and it's an issue which is usually fought at the municipal level. But there are other issues too, like taxation, property taxes, which also show up in rents. And landlords often use that as a reason for raising the rent. Well, their taxes went up and tenants have to pay their share, blah, blah, blah. So we have very good policies. We've elected people at the municipal level. I was elected to the school board for a term in the 1990s in Toronto, and we've had lots of people elected locally, and including in Edmonton. We had a comrade who was elected a number of years ago. Okay, maybe, I'm not sure when, I can't remember the date, it's quite a while ago, but Naomi can tell you. And we should be able to do that again. And keeping in mind, by the way, that the reactionary right is targeting school boards, this is a very good reason for us to get active. Well, there are going to be municipal elections across the country in the next 2 years, 25 and 26, and we want to be ready. And our goal here is to elect people to fight for our policies. But the best way to do it is to pull together progressive people who can agree on the kinds of policies that we're fighting for, particularly on housing, but not only, to form municipal reform movements that could elect communists, NDPers, progressive people who agree with the kind of demands that we want to advance and fight for at the municipal level. This is where the policies of federal and provincial governments that are aimed to help corporations and screw working people, this is where the rubber hits the road, and where we can mobilize a lot of people to fight. And we can also elect to local government, and that's important. I hope does that help? I hope it helps. Let me encourage.
Yeah, thanks.
Let me encourage you to come to that conference, and we can certainly put you in touch with people who are working on housing across the country and give you a hand before that.
Absolutely.
Thanks. Okay. Elle in Edmonton, did you have your hand up?
I did, yeah. Yeah. But I was so entertained listening to the answer of the period that I didn't get time to think about my question properly. I just wanted to hear thoughts perhaps on the immigration system in Canada. I don't know if anything was discussed about perhaps like normalization of current migrants. I saw that you have something in there about their migrants as a mass movement that hasn't been brainwashed entirely by the Red Scare. So there's like a source of movement there. But I wonder if perhaps like is within the table to I think that there was normalization of giving status to migrants who have or landed migrants as
Yep.
I think.
Yes.
And so yeah, go for it. Yeah, that's my question.
Sure. There is an organization that we work with here called Migranti. I don't know if it exists in Alberta or not, but it fights for status for all. And this matches our demands. Canada is a very big country. We all know that. We all live here, so we all know that 99% of the population lives within 100 miles of the US border, one way or another, and that there are vast stretches of land here which are arable, livable, but not inhabited. And so it means that Canada could have a much larger population than it currently has. And the times call for that. With so many people around the world now who are the victims of climate change caused by the big transnational corporations in the biggest capitalist countries, and wars caused by the big transnationals in the biggest capitalist countries, including Canada. There is an obligation here. We are seeing currently the biggest mass movements of people that have existed since the Second World War. And it's because, it's because of the multinational corporations and the drive to war and to conquer, for the advanced capitalist countries, the imperialist powers, to aggressively take control of other countries and cause war and cause catastrophes that force people to move. And we've seen the big, refugee camps in areas of, where there are wars, but also in areas where, around the Mediterranean, for example, and people dying trying to cross the Mediterranean Sea, and, in these tiny little boats that a big wave can tip over, and they're full of women and kids, and, just horrible stories of people trying to escape conditions that have been caused by the imperialist countries in the West and in the Northern Hemisphere. So we support the normalization of people's status in Canada. We think that all migrants and refugees should be covered by, should have healthcare coverage, should have access to schools and education, should have the protection of labor laws, pathetic though they are, but nevertheless, they should have the same protections as Canadian-born workers. And they should have access to jobs and also to citizenship in Canada. Now, there is I want to add here, there is a related question, of course, and that is the land claims and the rights of the Indigenous people, who are the first inhabitants of Canada and of North America. So it is essential that we also proceed as a country to recognize the sovereignty and the rights of Indigenous peoples. And, we start our meetings, as we did this one, with recognition of Indigenous rights, but that also means that we have to put that into practice. So we want to see a new Canadian Constitution that would recognize the national rights of English-speaking Canadians, of Quebec, of the Indigenous peoples, and there are many different nations there, and also the French-speaking population in Nova Scotia, and especially in New Brunswick. And so that, the current Canada doesn't even, as a state, doesn't even recognize the status of Quebec as a nation, which is the second biggest nation in the country. They say, that Trudeau says, well, he recognizes that they are a nation, but it's meaningless, because nations have the right to self-determination, including the right to secession, and that is not recognized by the Canadian government. And so all of these things come together. Yes, they're all urgent, but they're all part of a package. And so we want to see progress on all of these things, on the rights of immigrants, on the rights of refugees. We want to see the Safe Third Country, by the way, Act, or it's not an act, it's an agreement between Canada and the United States that would prevent people who arrive in the US as refugees from applying to Canada as refugees. And this means that this is what forces people to try to cross from Canada to the US illegally. because they're not allowed to do it legally. They get sent back to the States because of this bloody agreement. It's killing people, literally killing people. We've all seen it on TV where people freeze to death as they try to cross, you know, several miles holding a suitcase in one hand and a small kid in the other hand, or small kids trailing behind them, or bigger kids, or what have you. Horrible things have happened. So all of this has to do with democratic and national rights. And they're not competing with each other. We say it all has to be solved. This is part of the kind of Canada we want to see, we demand to see. So I don't know if that answers your question. Elle in Edmonton, if I've missed something, please speak up.
No, it was wonderful. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I wish I could resolve the problem that way. We could send a letter to Parliament, say, this is how you do it. We're going to have to fight for those rights. That's pretty clear, because they're fighting to make sure that those rights are not secure, are not part of the deal for people coming to this country.
Well, I think that's a good note to conclude on, comrades and friends. I want to thank everyone who's attended tonight, both in person and online. And you've certainly given us a lot to chew over here, Liz. So, you know, these issues will all be carried forward into our party clubs, and, you know, we'll be going to work on them in the coming months. So once again, thank you, friends and comrades. Thank you very much, Liz, for your very
It was a pleasure. Thanks for your patience and a long introduction, and for the very useful questions and comments that were made. Thank you.
Okay, so yes. Okay, so I can stop.
Thank you, comrade.
Yeah, thank you, Comrade Liz. Wonderful presentation.